is a trusted source, that the information that you're getting is valid, and it's not just, some crazy individual's opinion, but that it's grounded in science and grounded in things that, virologists and infectious disease people understand. And so it's with that intent that, let me just give you, for those of you that don't know my history, who might just know me as a happy member of St. Paul's, what I do when I'm not part of St. Paul's. So I am a faculty member, a professor at Fox Chase Cancer Center here in Fox Chase in Philadelphia. I've been at Fox Chase as a faculty member for over 25 years. It's where Eileen and I moved when we moved from California back to Philadelphia, or to Philadelphia, and she started working at Children's Hospital. Fox Chase is the only place that I've been a member of the faculty. Since being at Fox Chase, I've taken on a lot of other administrative jobs. So I'm also the chief academic officer at Fox Chase, but relevant to tonight, what my lab studies and what I've worked on since my graduate career are viruses. I've studied herpes viruses, influenza, measles virus. I don't work on coronaviruses, which is the cause of this current pandemic, but I know a lot about them. I think a couple of other things may be worth noting. One is that, and again, I apologize, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but it's just to provide a little bit of my credentials. I am one of the co-authors of this fancy pants textbook called Principles of Virology. It's expensive, so you probably would need to write a faith and action grant to afford one of these bad boys. But in any case, this was a great experience for me. I've been part of two editions of this. It's a 2-volume thing, and I actually brought this volume down for a reason, because maybe I'm going to use the figure on the front cover of one of them. But this was such a tremendous experience to be part of this author team. There's 5 of us that write this, because the chapters that I wrote were all about viruses and disease and vaccines and immunity. So this is stuff that I live and breathe. And it's stuff that my lab actually also works on. The other thing that I think might be relevant here is that, along with a tremendous team of other folks, I'm part of Fox Chase's COVID response team. So we don't have COVID at Fox Chase. All of our patients, before they come in for any kind of procedure, are tested outside of the cancer center, and anyone who tests positive still gets care, but they get care at Jean's Hospital, not at Fox Chase. And this is important because cancer patients are immunocompromised, and they're at not greater risk of infection, but they're certainly at greater risk of disease should they become infected. And so that has been also very enlightening for me, because I'm not a physician. I have a PhD, not an MD. And so this has given me an opportunity to understand how the kind of abstract side of what I do, working on viruses in a research laboratory, how they actually impact people and how they change lives. And as a result, especially since the vaccines have gone out, I've spent a good chunk of my last few weeks visiting at nursing stations at Fox Chase and at Jean's, at the infusion room. I just met with some environmental services people today to answer questions about the vaccines and to provide some information. And that leads to point number 2. My job tonight is not to convince you to get the vaccine. I'm not here to tell you what to do. You have autonomy in everything you do. You have autonomy in your healthcare decisions. So if you're anxious about the vaccine, if you don't want to get it, if you're distrustful of the process or the scientists that developed it, I'm not going to argue with you or try and change your mind. I simply feel what's important is that there is this just noise out there, right? I mean, all of us have said we're so happy that 2020 is behind us, because there was just too much. There was just too much information that was coming through. And there's a lot of information and a remarkable amount of misinformation about this infection, about the disease that it causes, and about the vaccines. So my job is simply to give you answers to some questions when those answers are known. And I will happily admit when either science doesn't have those answers or I specifically don't have those answers. And certainly Matt Mitchell sent along some remarkably helpful documents to me today, because I didn't know this, but he's actually also working on some similar things down at Penn. So if I don't have answers to it, maybe somebody else on this call will, because we're all a family, right? A church family here. My final point before I stop is what I'm hoping to do is not just be, the guy that answers questions about COVID, although I feel like a lot of the time in the hall at the cancer center, that's exactly what happens, right? On my way to just get some soup, I get pulled over and asked, is it okay because I've got, diabetes and really bad reflux? Is it okay for me to go ahead and get the vaccine? And that's perfectly fine. But my job is actually to empower you to do this too. Because what I think will happen is you have no idea, and I'm at the risk of almost becoming giddy or emotional here, you have no idea what kind of a success scientifically and medically these vaccines are. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will certainly tell you that the moment that a vaccine becomes available for me, I will get that vaccine. I will encourage anyone I know to get that vaccine. Eileen actually got her first shot yesterday because she's she works with patients. And it is a dancing in the streets kind of moment. And it may not feel that way to you, but this is, whatever metaphor you want to use, a grand slam. This is as big as it gets, because the fact that we have not one, but multiple safe and effective vaccines to quell this pandemic that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans alone, no less millions of people worldwide, and changed lives for the worse. All of us have been impacted by this, even if we haven't been infected, and caused businesses to close and all the rest. The fact that the scientific and medical community, and I had nothing to do with it, so I will accept no praise for this whatsoever, but the fact that scientists have been able to mobilize that quickly to put this thing, put this thing in our past is a thing worth celebrating. It's a remarkable achievement. But the way in which this is going to ultimately be behind us, the way that we can start interacting with each other like this without masks, but not on Zoom, but in person, is when enough of us have immunity to this infection. And that is either that you get that one of two ways, either because you got the vaccine and you're protected because of the vaccine, or because you were naturally infected with SARS coronavirus. I think, and then I'll be quiet for a bit and see what kinds of things you want to talk about. But I think a friend of mine once said, vaccines don't work, vaccinations work. And it's clever, but I think it's a good point, right? If I have a vaccine and it just sits on a table, it doesn't do any good. People have to be willing to say, yeah, you know what? I'll take that vaccine. Let's have it, pop it into my arm here. And when people begin to, even though there may be some hesitancy, maybe even on your part about taking the vaccine, the more that we begin to see friends and neighbors and members of our congregation and family members get this vaccine, be fine as a consequence of it, the more we're going to be reassured about getting our vaccines ourselves. And the more of us that get it, the quicker we can put this behind us. I've said, and who knows, I don't have a crystal ball about this at all, but I've said prior to the holidays, when people ask what do I think the timing for this will be, is I said it's going to be a very different Christmas season. It's going to be a very dark winter. It's going to be a hopeful spring, and it could be a wonderful summer. And I think that is possible if these vaccines roll out when we think they're going to, and people do get them. But you have to be ambassadors too. If you're going to get a vaccine, you've got to be able to tell your friends and colleagues about it and help them feel comfortable with the process too, right? The idea is that we catalyze conversations. I'm not going to do all of this myself, nor is Jason, who's part of our congregation, or Matt, or Julie Sullivan, or any of the other healthcare folks who are part of the congregation. You can actually have those conversations and provide reassurance to other folks as well. And it's when that kind of magnifies is when I think we get closer to being finished with this, which is obviously something that we all want. So let's take a stop there. What I'd like to kind of do is break this up, and I want to be respectful of your time. I will happily stay on past 8:30, but I think Probably by then we'll have gotten a lot of things addressed. I want to spend the first chunk of this talking about the vaccines themselves and questions either about concerns you might have about how quickly they were made, what an RNA vaccine is, and that you've heard that it's problematic for this group or that group, or that it changes your DNA, or how does it work? Why is this different? And I'd like to spend maybe half an hour till about 8:15 just talking about the vaccines, because I think that is what you tuned in for, and I think that's probably what's most important. And then maybe what we can do is spend, if we get most of those questions handled, we can spend the last 15 minutes just talking about the pandemic in general. If you have questions about the virus, how it's spread, how you can prevent yourself, this new variant that everybody is kind of freaking out about, I'm happy to kind of cover any of those things, but let's put that to the last 15 minutes. So all right, let me look at the chat box here. All right, so, okay. So what I'm gonna ask is that if you've got a question, because again, I think the chat box is fine, we can all see it. I see Elaine's question, which is actually a pretty sophisticated, deep in question. So let's start, I'll get to Elaine's question, but let's just see if we've got general questions about what the vaccine is, and then we can talk a little bit about its efficacy against other variants and things. So feel free, if you're not shy, to unmute yourself and fire something over the bridge here. You all can hear me, right?
Yes, people are going to need to unmute themselves.
Okay, yeah, you just have to unmute yourself.
Question from Paul Ziegler, which is the vaccine was developed quite rapidly. Other vaccines have taken longer time and have been tested, as far as I know, in more people. Is that true? And does it make a difference?
So Paul is certainly right that this vaccine was developed in record time. Other than these vaccines, the next fastest development of a vaccine was mumps, a vaccine many of us got when we were kids. And that turnaround time was 4 years, 4 years between the identification of the virus and the development and deployment of an effective vaccine, 4 years. So this is the reason why I talk about this being a grand slam, because this vaccine was developed, right? If you figure that the world became aware of a pandemic sometime in plus minus January, February of this past year, and here we are in January, 1 year later, that is remarkable. And again, we've got multiple vaccines, not just one. So Paul points out something that a lot of people have expressed anxiety about, which is this feels too fast. It feels scary fast. And the worry that maybe in the development of these vaccines, important corners were cut, and that might make you be doubtful of the efficacy of the vaccines, right? I don't know, I can see some of your faces. Any of you feel that way, where you're a little bit concerned about the speed of this? Just nod your heads if any of you feel a little bit like, yeah, this was too fast. Okay.
The only speed I care about is how soon am I getting it?
Okay, well, there are people who, right, I mean, we divide into different groups, right? There are some people who are like, when is this thing coming and how fast can I get it? And, what and then there are other people who I think are, depends on how you want to look at this, right? I mean, that it was done quickly is absolutely certain. There's no question about it. Whether it was done too quickly or whether it was done hastily, a lot of times it's the semantics of the words that you use for this. So maybe a couple of things will provide some comfort here. So the technology that is being used for the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, these two vaccines, two different companies, both of those have this emergency use authorization from the FDA, and both of them are virtually identical. I couldn't come up with any really good reason why you would pick one over the other, right? This is not like comparing McDonald's French fries and Burger King French fries, where people have, strong allegiances to one or the other. They're very, very similar. The technology that's being used to deliver these vaccines, these are these RNA vaccines, has been under development for over a decade. this might be really obvious to you, but one of the companies' name is Moderna. The last 3 letters are RNA, because the whole company was founded on the idea that RNA vaccines are going to be the easiest and quickest to make, and also far safer than any of the other vaccine sort of approaches that have been developed before, including replication competent vaccines and whole viruses. That's how polio virus works, where you're getting the entire virus. This is a much more, the risk of a weird word, it's a much more elegant vaccine delivery system than any of the other vaccines that you're used to getting or that your kids got when they were little. So even though the coronavirus vaccines are new and have been under development only recently, the technology of using RNA as a tool has been around for over a decade. The other thing is that, as I pointed out, these RNA vaccines are very, very easy to make. It's not a surprise that the first 2 that made it across the FDA approval process were the RNA-based companies. We've got AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson and Sanofi Pasteur and other ones that are coming due in another month or 2. But it's not surprising that the RNA ones are the quickest, because they are the easiest to make. They are really easy and straightforward compared to the way in which some of the other vaccines have been developed. At the risk of seeming a little provocative, yeah, corners were absolutely cut in making these vaccines. And that might make you go, wait, what? Corners were cut? But the corners that were cut were all of the bureaucratic administrative corners, right? You can imagine that when a piece of paper arrives on somebody's desk in a government office, it goes to the bottom of that pile, and it takes a while for that thing to work its way to the top. Here we had a global crisis where everyone's lives and livelihoods were hanging in the balance. And so it was expedited from a paperwork perspective, but no corners. And some of you don't perhaps know who I am, so you might be like, well, he's just part of the system, and I can't, if that is how you feel, I can't change your mind about this. But I don't work, I don't get money for vaccines. I mean, there's nothing that I'm doing that is filling my own pockets with this. But I can promise you that safety corners were not cut in the development of these vaccines. These vaccines went through consolidated phase 1-2 trials. We have results that have been released from phase 3 trials, which have allowed for these emergency use authorizations. And in all of those studies, in all of the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who have elected to be part of the clinical trials to get these vaccines, what we know is it is 95% effective, and it is safe, that there were no negative consequences that could be attributed to these vaccines in people who have tested them. And that was a broad range of people. They weren't just testing, hale, hearty 20-year-olds. That was people who were elderly. That was people who had comorbidities, including cancer, allergies, immunosuppression. And in all of those cases, the vaccine was shown to be safe and effective. So yeah, it was quick. It was quick because it had to be quick. Because I don't know, could you endure another year or 2 or 3 of this? Could you wait the 4 years that the mumps virus took, or mumps vaccine took? So there was this urgency. And so in some way, yeah, if you're going to look at the glass half empty and you want to be like, well, I feel like it was rushed. I can't change your mind about that, but I think I would look at it on the other hand of saying, this was when humanity, pat yourself on the back there, humanity, because this is when they realized there was a problem, and it was sole focus on getting these vaccines up and out.
Len, if I could
Yes.
piggyback on that, John actually was part of the Pfizer trial, and we discovered he actually got the vaccine in July. He didn't grow 3 ears. So, but I know from what he went through that they were meticulous. He had daily logins. I think it was weekly checks, so they were constantly monitoring and collecting data on him. If that helps anybody with, were they being meticulous about what they were doing?
Yep.
I can describe some of the things about these trials too.
All right. So, Henrik, go ahead.
Mike Edelman asked, do you know what's in the vaccine? Members of the autism parents group are already working themselves into a tizzy saying the Pfizer vaccine has aluminum and fetal tissue and are saying there's no way they will get their adult autism family members vaccinated.
We're not one of them.
Yeah. So actually, I'm so glad that Mike asked this. And actually, I got into a little bit of, what's that?
It was Sue, actually, but
It was
she's
Sue.
on my
Mike
computer.
Edelman's name shows up on the thing, but I do see Sue's
It's Mike's computer.
So I'm so glad that you asked about this. I got into, the head of communications at Fox Chase is a guy named Jeremy Moore, and Jeremy and I, we are frenemies a little bit. I think we both enjoy making each other's lives agonizing, and so I actually had a bit of an argument with Jeremy because we do videos that are produced for Temple Health System. I'm actually doing one on Thursday. And he said, you know, what we're trying to do is convince the anti-vaxxers to get their vaccine. And I said, hang on. There are people who very strongly believe that vaccines such as MMR contribute to childhood autism. Now, that is a whole different topic. I actually happen to know a fair bit about that as well. I can tell you with every, bone in my body that vaccines do not cause childhood autism. But there are parents and people who believe that they do, and that is their prerogative and their right. They are fairly angry, and they are certainly vocal. And they have gotten the term anti-vaxxers because they believe that all vaccines, MMR in particular, but they believe all vaccines are dangerous and they cause problems and they're not going to give them to their kids. And again, I feel sorry for that child who doesn't get the protection that a vaccine can afford, but that's their prerogative. People who are concerned about the COVID vaccine, maybe some of you aren't anti-vaxxers. You are looking at this and you're saying, I want to make sure that I'm making the right choice. I have questions about this. The noise and all of the rumors and all the other things that are floating around make me doubt. And therefore, it's an entirely different conversation to talk to folks who might be doubting about whether they're going to get the COVID vaccine, and you therefore aren't anti-vaxxers. To Mike's question, what's in the vaccine? So one of the benefits of these RNA vaccines is they're extraordinarily simple. In other vaccines, so think about, let's see, what's a good example? So,
replicating virus.
So if you think about the need of keeping, let's say, meat, let's see, let's play this out. Let's see if this metaphor makes sense. In order to keep meat from going bad, you've got to do all sorts of things, right? You either have to preserve it, like salt it, or put in, preservatives like they inject, I guess, ham with, or you have to keep it refrigerated. There's all sorts of things that help to keep the meat that you just purchased at Giant or wherever, edible and safe. Vaccines aren't meat, but vaccines fall apart or can go bad as well. So there are some preservatives that are put into vaccines that help them to stay effective from the point where they're made in, at Merck or at Pfizer or wherever they're made to the point where they go into somebody's arm. And those preservatives often are the reason why people get anxious about vaccines. It's not so much the vaccine itself, but it's the stuff that's in there that helps to preserve it. The RNA vaccines actually have no preservatives in them. They consist of an RNA molecule that encodes a protein of the SARS coronavirus called spike, and I can show you a picture of what it looks like. And those RNA molecules are in a little lipid droplet, a little oil or fat droplet. That fat droplet does two things. It helps to preserve or protect the RNA because the RNA is super fragile and can fall apart in a moment's notice. But those little lipid droplets also make the RNA molecule look tasty to cells when it gets injected into your arm. Your cell will gobble the lipid particle up, and in so doing, will bring the RNA into the cell itself, which is the first essential step to making the protein that then ultimately will afford protection. Other than that, there is some sugar in there. There are some salts that help to keep pH. but there is nothing else in here that is going to create concerns or problems that would cause any alarm as far as the stuff that's in them. In fact, you might have heard that the Pfizer vaccine has to be kept at really, really cold temperatures, minus 80 degrees Celsius, far colder than any freezer that we have in our homes. And that's precisely because it doesn't contain preservatives, and therefore you have to keep it super, super cold. Otherwise, this thing won't be effective. Did that help, Mike and Sue?
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Sure.
That was actually one of the corners that was cut. To
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, that was one of the corners that was cut by Pfizer. To they could have spent time testing the stability of the vaccine at refrigerator temperatures or normal freezer temperatures, but because they wanted to get this out and help vaccinate everybody as soon as possible, they actually skipped that step. So they're just saying, all right, we're just going to keep it at minus 80. They figured it would be easier to solve the logistics problem than to spend the time testing the activity of the virus. Now, I think the Moderna does not require quite that much because they did the tests.
And also
So that's part of the reason that they were a little bit later.
And also I think this is a little, Matt and I are geeking out very briefly, but I think the composition of the lipids that these little RNA molecules are sitting in are a little bit different. They're proprietary, but they're a little bit different between Moderna and Pfizer. So right, the Moderna one doesn't require the ultra cold. They still require like minus 20 Celsius, which is like a standard freezer, but they don't require the ultra.
Or the multiple channel.
All right, what else? Oh, okay, so Linda Hayes, I'm just seeing a couple questions here. I want to make sure I get to Elaine's because that one I remember seeing, and I want to talk about the variant because that's a good question. Linda Hayes asked in caps, so she must want to know the answer. Do you have to be proven virus-free to get the vaccine? All right, so this is a really good question, Linda. So you might think, well, if I already had COVID, why should I get the vaccine? Aren't I already protected? And the answer is, well, maybe, but everyone is encouraging people, even if you already had COVID, to get the vaccine. So why would that be? Let me explain the reasoning here. Depending upon the severity of the case that you had. So you've heard about neutralizing antibodies, right? You know that one of the things that a vaccine will induce is neutralizing antibodies. It's not the only thing that is part of your immune memory, but it's a thing. And when you get infected with the SARS coronavirus, and here I mean you get the infection, not the vaccine, depending upon how severe a case you'll have, different humans can have an extraordinarily broad range of neutralizing antibodies. Generally, but not exclusively, people who had really mild cases, the ones that didn't get sick at all, or who just lost their sense of taste or smell, or who felt kind of lousy for a day, generally, the easier case you have, the lower your neutralizing antibodies. And obviously you want as high a dose, there we refer to it as titer, you want as high a titer as possible, because the higher the titer, the more robust your immune memory is. So individual patients that get infected are over an extraordinarily broad range. The vaccines, every person gets the same amount of RNA. It's a certain weight out, it's either 30 micrograms or 100 micrograms, doesn't matter, but everyone gets the same amount. And so what this does is it provides a more equalized neutralizing antibody response for all of the recipients. Moreover, that antibody response is far higher than the antibody response that most infected people make. And it's for that reason that we want folks to get vaccinated, even if you already had the infection. One of the things we don't know, because this pandemic is relatively new, is how long your immune response protects you, right? That's a worry, like people are like, do I have to get this vaccine every year? Is this gonna be like the flu shot? And there's reasons to think it might be, and there's reasons to think it might not be, but we just don't know because it's only been since January a year ago that this thing has been around. So the delivery of the vaccine is going to provide a consistently high level of neutralizing antibodies for all of the recipients. And it's the reason why we recommend that even if you had been exposed, that you get it. Now, there is a caveat. If you had COVID, let's say within the last few weeks, last month, it's recommended that you wait. Not because there's any danger to you to get the vaccine, but better because you want to actually have time in between your exposures, right? So if you got infected, let's say December 15th, you want to kind of give your immune response a chance to settle back down before you now hit it with the vaccine, which is going to, kind of wake it back up again and cement that immune response in. So the only recommendation that's made for people who've had COVID is if you actively have COVID, don't get the vaccine. And if you've had COVID, and I would say within the last 30, 35 days, wait for a little while and then go ahead and get the vaccine after a period of about six weeks or so. But otherwise, if you had COVID in the summer, back in the spring, you are strongly urged to go ahead and get both the doses of vaccine. So that's a good question, Linda. And let me just get to it because I worry that I'm not going to remember. So some of you may have heard that there is this variant that's floating around, right? And everybody's kind of freaking out about this thing. Because you sort of think, how much more can I take, right? I mean, we've had a difficult year. This stupid pandemic came and now it's mutating, and when we think about mutations, you tend to think of like swamp creatures, emerging out of this is what viruses do. It is what they do. No virologist no infectious disease physician is surprised that there is this variant. There's nothing magical about this. Viruses, and we can talk about this, at great length. You can imagine I can babble on, I'm already doing it at length, but viruses make mutations all the time. And most of those mutations fail. Think about a kid playing, a kid learning a Beethoven sonata, right? That she's gonna start playing and she's gonna sometimes hit a wrong note, but it'll still sound like a Beethoven sonata. And other times it'll just be such a disaster, she has to stop and start all over again. The vast majority of mutations that viruses include are ones that make the virus fail. A rare number of times might you end up having a mutation that allows that virus to survive or to last longer or even outcompete the parent from which it was derived. But that's super rare. That's equivalent to a kid learning a Beethoven sonata where she suddenly plays a note that makes the sonata sound even better than what Beethoven had originally written. You can imagine that that is a really unlikely circumstance. Happily, and this is your big takeaway after that little science dump, happily, it is predicted that the vaccines, the Moderna, the Pfizer, the AstraZeneca, the J&J, all of these vaccines will be effective not only to the parental strain, but also to this variant strain as well. So if the variant, I guarantee you, I actually just got a text from Tom Averill, who's one of the Philadelphia Inquirer science writers, and he's like, is the variant, when do you think the variant's going to be in Philadelphia? And I said, it's not a matter of if, but when. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few weeks, suddenly on your Philadelphia Inquirer, it's like, variant in Philadelphia. Don't freak out. You're not going to do anything different. You're still going to wear your mask. You're still going to keep distance. You're still going to wash your hands, and the vaccine is still going to work. And this variant may be a little bit more infectious, but it is not necessarily more pathogenic. It's not going to make you sicker than the other one. It just is perhaps one that is a little bit easier to get than the parent strain.
That's one of the good things about this technology is that if there are changes in the spike protein, which the vaccine is designed to stimulate a response to, the technology of the mRNA vaccines in sequencing is going to make it very, very easy to make a new vaccine. So just like we have to come up with different flu vaccines each year for the mutations that keep happening in the flu virus, and that's a big if we have a coronavirus mutation that's going to affect the efficacy of the vaccine. Making a better vaccine is going to be very easy to do. It's a matter of months, even faster than what we've got now.
Yep, thanks, Matt. There are a couple of really good questions that folks have asked. Let me kind of hit them in a little bit of a lightning round here. So Nancy says, is the vaccine recommended for women who are pregnant or considering pregnancy? So there's this thing. This is one of those urban legends like, well, pregnant women shouldn't get it. And it's completely understandable. It's fueled by two things. Number one, pregnant women were not included in the clinical trials. They were just not included in the clinical trials. And number two, England, who actually released or approved the use, because the FDA is the United States thing, Britain has their own, Britain or England, whatever they're called, released approval for the vaccination, but they said, yeah, but not for pregnant women. And so the implication was, yikes, this is bad for women who are pregnant or who are considering getting pregnant or who are breastfeeding. That's the implication that a lot of people heard when the government said, not for that group of individuals, when in fact they were just being super conservative because that group of individuals had not been tested in these safety trials that we've spent some time talking about that provide me with the reassurance to be able to say to all of you that it would be safe if this is the decision you make to get your vaccine. So do I know,
trials,
what's that?
Oh, I'm going to jump in.
Well, let me, all right, well, let me finish this point, Matt.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I think the important point here is that I cannot say to you that there is no risk to anyone getting this vaccine, right? You're all your unique little snowflake with your own particular challenges and histories and comorbidities and all sorts of other things. And can I point to a group of people who's exactly like you who were tested in these vaccine cohorts and say, look, they're fine, therefore you'll be fine? I can't. But what we know is that these vaccines are safe for all of the individuals in whom they're tested. And even if I put on my most science fiction speculative hat here, I cannot think of how this vaccine is going to cause any lasting problem to anyone, including pregnant women. And that's a big thing for me to say, right? Because at the risk of sounding cavalier and saying, oh, it's perfectly fine, go ahead and get it. If you're pregnant, no problem. I don't want to put myself on the line for this, right? This is a very important, sort of piece of advice to give. And so I would not feel comfortable saying this unless I was 100% certain about this. All of the pediatric associations, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the society that obstetricians and gynecologists are part of, all of them recommend that women who are pregnant or considering getting pregnant get the vaccine. And the only other point I'll make, and then if people want to jump in on this, they are welcome to, this vaccine lasts in you hours, right? You get the vaccine at, 10 o'clock in the morning. By dinner time, your body, there's no trace of that vaccine left, I'm going to guess. It's probably somewhere in the range of about 12 to 14 hours. But because what happens is, remember that RNA that I told you about is super fragile. It falls apart fast. But what happens in that brief period of time that it's in your arm and it doesn't circulate, it doesn't go into a vein and percolate all around you, it stays quite local. In that brief period of time, that RNA is used to make a protein. And that protein is what turns on or alerts your immune response. So everything that happens thereafter isn't the vaccine. The vaccine is like the catalyst. Everything that happens thereafter is your immune response. So a pregnant woman, I can't conceive of what that vaccine potentially could do or what harm it could do. It's going to get absolutely nowhere near a developing fetus or embryo. So I don't think that there are any perils or any risks to this, but I'm also not a physician. So what I would always counsel anyone who is considering this is have a conversation with your obstetrician or with your primary care provider, because that relationship They know your history specifically. They know what your concerns are, and their advice should be listened to. But from a scientific vantage point, I see no threats or damage here. Fred asks, what about the proposal to give half doses to get it to more people? So this is, some of you have taken my bioethics class. Remember, years ago, I would teach a bioethics class, and this is actually a great bioethics question, right? Because the doses for the Moderna and the Pfizer, you get two, right? You get one dose, and then you wait 3 or 4 weeks, depending on which of the vaccines, and then you get your second dose. It's not like it's all or none. So unless you get both doses, you're not protected. You actually have some immune protection after the first dose. And so there have been some people, and I actually completely get it, that say, well, if we gave everyone one dose, so now everyone's protected up to 65%, we can now vaccinate twice the number of people. Isn't that a thing we would want to do? And I understand the logic there. And I understand that. And it's actually a very kind of empathetic thing, right? We're trying to get as many people on the boat, as it were, as possible. And if the thing that's limiting is the number of vaccines, well, then rather than giving Glenn 2, why don't we give Glenn 1 and Ziegler 1, and now we've covered 2 people. Here's the reasons why that's not a great idea. And so here, I'm going to use another metaphor, because I think in terms of metaphors. So I'm a terrible driver. But for reasons that are completely unclear, yeah, Eileen's nodding her head. But for reasons that are completely unclear, I taught the girls how to parallel park. At least I taught one of them how to parallel park. Eileen, let me have this.
Either.
All right, you're on mute. So, well, anyway, just hang with me. Maybe I'm making this up. I taught Kelsey how to parallel park. So what I did is we got in the car. She'd never parallel parked before. So, and it's weird to do, and for reasons that are unclear, even to Eileen, which she will have to admit, I am a very good parallel parker. I can do it. I'm fearless, and I can parallel park.
Because he has no fear about hitting the other car.
Well, we didn't realize that this was going to turn into a make fun of Glenn session, but here it is. So when I was teaching Kelsey that had never parallel parked before, it's weird, it's hard. You have to kind of figure out how to jiggle your car and get
How
it
many
in
times
without.
have you hit the other car?
No. Stay with me. This is a good metaphor, Edelman. Just hang in there. So the first weekend that we practiced, she'd never done it before, and it was a little rocky, but we finally got her to the point where she could parallel park. It wasn't artful, but okay, fine. The next weekend, I think without me warning, I just said, Kelsey, let's go. We're going to get in the car. You're going to parallel park again. And why that was important is that the first week, she was learning a thing for the first time. The second week, what we were doing is cementing in the behaviors that she had learned a week ago, right? We were kind of, it's almost the way that you study. You learn it, and then you kind of push it deeper into your brain so that you know the material more rather than just the superficial level. So week 1 was the first exposure for her. Week 2 cemented it. And it is a pretty good metaphor, even if it's not 100% true, for what these 2-dose vaccines are relevant for. Because the first one introduces your body to this thing. When you get that vaccine, your immune response is like, what the heck is this thing? And now it's going to make an immune response against the spike protein that the RNA makes. But the second dose you get 3-4 weeks later, your immune response knows now. Your immune response is like, oh, it's that thing again. And now what it does is it turns on and it gets even more refined. And I keep using the phrase cemented in, but what it does is it locks in the immunity. It's what gets us to that 95%. And so all of the RNA vaccines were tested in this 2-dose regimen. And so even though I'm empathetic with the idea that if you break the doses up and you give it to twice as many people, I think the efficacy for those vaccines is going to be far less. It's important that we end up having the people that get vaccinated are now your superheroes, right? They have this cloak of protection that will preclude them from getting infected. And it's for that reason that I don't think anyone, even though there are some discussions about this in the paper, I don't think that there's any move on the part of the health system that I work with or any of the other ones in Philly to consider breaking it into 2. It's just, I think it will not provide lasting, durable immune responses, even though the intent is a thoughtful one.
Hey, Glenn,
Yes.
Sophie has a really good question that I want you to address because it deals with children.
Kids. Yeah. So it's a little similar to pregnant women. So in the initial trials, children under the age of 16 for one of the vaccines and under the for Pfizer, and under the age of 14 for Moderna, 18, oh, sorry, got it wrong. Under the age of 18 for the Moderna vaccine were not included in the clinical trials. There is, again, no reason to think that children wouldn't benefit from these vaccines. But they are not yet authorized to use in kids. The emergency use, I keep saying, the emergency use authorization, it makes people a little bit nervous because they're like, well, wait a minute, like, is it approved or is it not approved? What's going on? It's because the phase 3 trials are still ongoing. The phase 1s and 2s are done, but the phase 3, they continue to enroll new individuals. They continue to collect new data. The data from the first tranche of phase 3s that was released was so solid, so compelling, so safe that they said we can approve for emergency use these vaccines. But those phase 3 trials are ongoing. And now what Pfizer, Moderna, and others are beginning to do is enroll kids into that trial. So I don't think it's going to be very long before we find out that these vaccines are both safe and effective for children as well. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't be. These vaccines are perfectly safe for very immunosuppressed cancer patients, for example. So if you sort of think, well, kids are, you know, their immune responses are just developing. Look at all the vaccines that we give to a little 6-month-old. So there's nothing different about this vaccine that would make us doubt it. It simply hasn't yet been tested. So my guess is you're going to start seeing kids be recommended for getting the vaccine somewhere in February, March, if I were a betting man. I think that's when they're going to start opening this up for that demographic.
Can I bring up a question that Nancy wrote?
Can everyone hear Eileen? Are you on mute? Because I don't know if you can.
It's they're hearing me through your microphone.
Okay, Paul is giving you a thumbs up.
Okay. Nancy had asked the question, you touched on it briefly, but I think this is a big concern people have, is what assurances can you give people who don't doubt the effectiveness of the vaccine but are worried about long-term effects?
Right.
You talked about that briefly, but if you could.
Okay, good. Thanks. So, right, I can't fight back the argument with, well, Mr. Smarty Pants, you know, it hasn't, we don't know what long-term effects there are. And yeah, this pandemic has been around since January. That's not very long-term. So can I promise you that there are no long-term effects? No. But I think I would make 2 important points that make me feel pretty secure that there are not long-term effects. Number 1, we have many vaccines that are out there. Think of them all, right? Pertussis, tetanus, measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, polio, smallpox. We have many, many vaccines. Shingles vaccine, well, that's the chickenpox one. We have many, many vaccines that are out there. None of them, 0 of them, cause long-term damage or long-term effects in any individuals who've received them. So I would answer the question, is it possible that these vaccines cause long-term damage? The same way I would answer this question, is it possible that these vaccines eventually will make us turn green and grow a second head? I cannot promise you they won't. I can't. That would be a lie. But there's been no principle on which we would base that worry or that concern. The second point I would make is we all have had to have gotten really good at risk calculation. So here's another metaphor. If I'm standing at Senor Salsa, you know where Senor Salsa is, up on 611? If I'm standing at Senor Salsa, let's say I'm a line chef, and I cut myself with a knife, and I'm bleeding pretty badly, and directly across the street is Abington Hospital. And somebody says, hey, Glenn, you need to get yourself some care. And I stand on the Senor Salsa side and I'm like, oh no, I'm worried I'm going to get hit by a car coming across 611. That guy can't say to me, I guarantee you won't get hit by a car, because 611 is a busy street. But what I can guarantee is if I don't get care pretty quickly, I'm going to have a rough round of it on the other side of the street from Abington Hospital. And the same is true here, right? So you might have concerns about risks for vaccines that no one authentically can reassure you or can promise you couldn't possibly happen. Even though there's no evidence to support it, we just haven't had enough time. But what I can tell you is that if you get this virus that this vaccine will prevent, the risks to you are considerable. Now, most people do just fine with it. Some of you have had it. I'm glad that you've gotten past it. But that is not universally true, right? Just today, over 3,000 Americans died of coronavirus in the country. Millions of people have died in the world as a result of this. And if we could just say, well, it's all the people whose last name begins with P and mine begins with R, so I'm perfectly safe. If we could just sort of characterize those people who are at great risk, well, okay, but we can't. It's not just the elderly. It's the hale and hearty. It's the kids in their 20s and 30s that sometimes will fall very sick and sometimes will die from this thing. So you have to calculate your risk, because it's not just what are the risks of getting this vaccine, but also what are the risks of not getting this vaccine. And that's the calculation that you independently, that I can't help you with, have to kind of figure out as to whether you're going to accept this vaccine with whatever potential risks it has, because there is a counterpoint.
This might be a good point. Now, Klaus asked, my wife and myself are affiliated with Jefferson. Do we wait now for a call from Jefferson, or how will it work to get on some kind of a list? If you want to get
all right, I'm going to have to tiptoe here a little bit. Okay, watch this. Our government has come under some criticism about vaccine development and COVID care in a general sense. I actually am not going to fault the system, the deployment system here, in the midst of a lot of complaints about how the US did or didn't handle this pandemic. I have opinions about how we handled this pandemic. The numbers are, it's actually more a matter of just looking at the numbers relative to other like-sized countries. But think about the logistical challenges of getting this vaccine out. So Klaus, I'm getting to your question in a second. It's not just a matter of having a vaccine that's safe and effective. It's now having enough of it to go into the arms of 337 million Americans. And that's just Americans. That doesn't include, Laotians and Brits and, Senegalese. And you have to have enough vials, and you have to have enough needles, and you have to have enough freezers, and you have to have distribution systems. This is an epic logistical sort of civil engineering challenge that we've never had to face in our lives before. And so it is not surprising that there are going to be some hiccups, right? So, the newspaper, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit like, well, things are going slowly. Well, I think it was the holidays. We're learning how to do this. It's going to get better. I promise. It's going to get faster. It's going to get better as people kind of work into the groove, just like Kelsey parallel parking. The first time she did it miserably, the fifth time she got it right. By the time we actually work into a system, we're going to actually be able to start deploying these vaccines more quickly. To Klaus's point about when will you know that it's time, I actually don't know the answer to how that works. My feeling is that there's going to be a point when we will find out that all individuals over a particular age, or all teachers, or some group are welcome to get their vaccines. And I actually don't know how that will work. It probably will be deployed through places like CVS or Walmart or Walgreens or something. They might set up tents. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to happen, but they have thought through the logistics of this. And the logistics are not trivial, right? Because to get 2 vaccines, you want to make certain it's not the end of the world if you got number 1 was Pfizer and number 2 Moderna. It's not like you're going to explode. But it is important that you know which one you got, because it is far better that you get Moderna, or Pfizer than that you mix and match these. And so just the record keeping for any one of you alone that, okay, Elaine Kraft got Moderna on February 1st, and therefore she's going to have to get her second Moderna vaccine on March 1st. Just the record keeping alone for that requires some infrastructure, and this is what we're beginning to learn. So I think as we come to a close here, so you guys can go to bed or read a book or something. I mean, I'll stay on, but I think you can, part of the job now is don't Charlie Brown football this thing now, right? We have made it this far. We have done remarkably as a community. Look at what St. Paul's has done, right? So let me use this as a chance to thank Henrik and Rayanne and Ethan and Stephen, our previous vicar. Decisions that were made were always with our safety in mind, and we've done remarkably well. Now is not the time to blow it. So keep your calm, wait patiently, even if you can't wait for that vaccine to come. It is coming. It may not come tomorrow or this month, but it's on its way. And in the meantime, the best thing that you can do is to do what you've done all along. Wear your masks, keep your distance from people, and ask people how they're doing, right? One of the silver linings of this horrible thing is that I find that now when I see people in the halls of Fox Chase, I say, how are you? And now I actually stick around for the answer. It's not just this perfunctory, it's we actually are all caring about each other more. No time more than, you know, on Sunday mornings or on Zoom calls with our fellow congregation members. So just stay the course, keep your ears and eyes open. I'm happy to do more of these. There are other professionals in our community that I'm sure will be just as able to talk about this stuff as well. So this doesn't have to be one and done, but there will be a way, Klaus or all of you, that you will know when it's your moment, when it's your time. I don't know how that messaging is gonna come through.
Glenn,
Yeah.
Jefferson Health has sent messages to their patients. I got one via their Helo system or whatever it's called, that they said to wait until don't call your family doctor because they may not even know yet. They will call you as soon as they have it available. That's what Jefferson Health said.
Yep.
And if I can,
What's that?
if I can piggyback on that, I was today at Chester. I know you guys all live in Montgomery County, but I live in Chester County. So, but Chester County pretty much, they had like a big news conference saying how they are doing all this and how they're letting people know. And pretty much what their advice is that you'll get contacted, and also just pay attention to your county public health department website. And like, they're gonna tell you when your like age group or whenever, like you'll see it posted everywhere when the time comes and it's for your turn to try to figure out how to get it. So
yes, it's definitely at the county level, and there's going to be various tiers of people. Healthcare workers are in that first tier. Other people with direct public contact, teachers, some other people in essential jobs will be in a second tier. High-risk individuals will be in that second tier, and then we'll go out to the average risk population. A lot of the younger people who don't have a comorbidity or another condition that would put them at greater risk if they got infected. But the logistics are going remarkably well. I can tell you that about half of Penn Medicine staff have already been vaccinated. And this is across our 6 hospitals in the whole region. And we're actually on to the point of getting the second dose to people starting. We've been doing that starting this week. So we're managing really well around here. I expect that it'll be handled. The big drugstores have a very good supply chain. They've got a lot of experience in dealing with the public. So it's likely to be working through them. But there's other stuff involved. There's paperwork, there's consent forms. People are going to need to stay for 15 minutes after they're vaccinated to make sure that there's not an unexpected allergic reaction or other adverse things. It's not going to be drive up in your car, get your shot, and drive away.
My sister had her vaccine on the 31st. Pharmacists rank higher than researchers, Glenn.
I have not gotten my vaccine.
My sister also works at Fox Chase. And she reported that they did have that 15-minute time that you had to be observed. And she had a sore arm. And that night she said she slept very fitfully. But by the next day, her arm was still sore, but she felt fine the next day.
The side effects for this thing, just so you're aware, because I wouldn't want any of you to get the vaccine, wake up in the middle of the night and be like, holy cow, they gave me COVID. Sore arm, 95% of people, just like the flu shot. 40 to 50% of people end up having something else. Low grade fever, like 99 point something, a little bit of myalgia, which is just like muscle aches. You know, it's fine. Take a couple of naproxen or Advil or whatever your drug of choice is. If you feel a little bit lousy after the vaccine, it will last for about 12 hours. And even though you might sleep fitfully, you can at least be like, go my body, because that proves that your body is actually making an immune response to the thing. It's exactly what you want to happen.
This is
that,
also why the second dose is yielding a higher rate of adverse events than the first one in the clinical trials.
Right. Well, right. It's the cementing in part. Right. So if you had if you had mild symptoms the first time, maybe you'll have a little bit more symptoms. But we're trying to be honest about those so that people are like, wait a minute, you didn't tell me I was going to have body aches. We're trying to be honest about this, but I think there's a period where in that candor, people are like, wait, there are side effects of the vaccine? No. Well, yes, but transient, not problematic, certainly not going to result in long-term deficits or problems, and all a positive indication, if you have them, that the immune response, your body's immune response is raring to go, which is the whole intent of this. I think one thing, maybe let's end here, and if you want to sign off and go watch The Bachelor or whatever you want to do, read a book. I don't know what you would want to do. But like I say, I'll stick around for a little while. My bedtime is very soon, but I'll stick around for a little while if a few of you want to hang on. But if you're just being polite and you're like, when is he going to shut up? It'll be very soon. But let's end on this important thing. Don't lose your cool. When you find out that your neighbor who, might have gotten, hooked up with someone who's going to give them their vaccine, and now you're like, how come he's gotten the vaccine and we haven't gotten the vaccine? This is all going to be unproductive, and it's going to just make you nuts. It won't roll out perfectly. It's not like we have stratified every human in the world and we know exactly the order that they're going to get them. If some people get their vaccine ahead of you, it's fine. And in some way, unlike this is, there's only 100 loaves of bread and you're going in and now somebody got in front of you and now there's no loaf for you. Actually look at it from the perspective that every person that gets vaccinated is one more person that this virus cannot infect. And the more that we build this literal wall, we refer to it as an immunological wall, the more of us that are vaccinated and protected, either because of the vaccine or because of natural infection, the quicker we banish this thing and we don't have to think about it, and it won't infuse every single one of our conversations, right? The quicker that this can be a conversation that's a Bible study or a conversation about supporting each other and not about pandemic vaccines. So just deep breath, hang in there. It's not going to be a fun couple of months. More people will die from this thing. It is a serious infection. I was taken over to the Jeans Hospital ICU back in April by a friend of mine who's the other guy that runs the COVID response team. He's the chief medical officer at Fox Chase. And I've never seen anything so upsetting. While I stood there for 20 minutes, 2 people died, and another person, the physician that I was with, pointed to her and said, I don't know what to do for her. This woman will be dead by later this afternoon. And I presume that that was true. It isn't trivial, but look how far we've come. In the interval between March, April, I think I went over in April, and now, even though there are so many more cases, the death rate has gone down. That's not the virus, that's us. That's physicians knowing what to do with those patients. That physician, she doesn't have to say, I don't know what to do about this woman anymore. We have drugs, we have approaches, we have tests that we can indicate whether you're going to be heading down the right or the wrong path. So medicine has come so far in these 8 months or so, or 10 months that we've been actively contending with this, and we have vaccines. Now's not the time to freak out. Just stay calm, do what you've done all along. Don't get jealous because somebody gets their vaccine ahead of you. Yours is coming. It is. And once it comes, I hope, although I'm not telling you what to do, but I hope you do consider getting it, because it's the way out of this maze. Okay?
Then I want
All
to
right.
take this opportunity to thank you for your time and expertise. Thank you for being with us tonight, answering all of our questions patiently and very expertly, and with wonderful images and analogies, so that the average person like me can understand what you're talking about. So thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you so much.
And if you've got
Glenn.
questions, I see a whole bunch of them. I'll stick around. Please go do something other than this. But if you want to stick around, I'll stick around, and we can chat. But nice to